Hey there, pirates! Welcome aboard the Anime No Mi channel. Luffy is far from having mastered the power of Conqueror's Haki, a power that not even Shanks can fully control. And today, you're going to discover the true power of Conqueror's Haki in one piece. I hope for your support to help our crew win, and to do so, you just need to click the thumbs up button, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel. By doing this, you will win an incredible devil fruit, so just comment which fruit you want. Guys, the King's Haki, or Haoshoku Haki, is the ultimate power in one piece, reserved for the chosen ones who carry the will to conquer the world, like Gol D. Roger, who splits the sky with Whitebeard in chapter 966, or Shanks, who intimidates Admiral Greenbull from afar in chapter 1054 with a look that makes the air tremble. Luffy awakens his Conqueror's Haki in chapter 1010 against Kaido, using it to infuse his punches with a force that makes the Emperor spit blood, like in Gear 5 where he turns the world into rubber in chapter 1045. But theory suggests this is just the lowest step. The true power of Conqueror's Haki goes beyond massive knockouts or attack infusion, reaching cosmic levels that manipulate collective wills, shape destiny, and alter reality. Something that Luffy, despite his post-Wano growth in chapter 1057, has barely scratched, and that Shanks, even as a master, has not fully mastered either. In chapter 519, Rayleigh explains that Conqueror's Haki is the ability to impose your will on others, winning hearts or crushing spirits. Luffy uses this instinctively, like in chapter 634 on Fishman Island, where he knocks out 50,000 fishmen with a glance, or in chapter 1049, where he infuses the Bajrang gun to defeat Kaido. Shanks, on the other hand, seems more advanced, stopping an entire war at Marineford in chapter 580 with his presence and intimidating Greenbull in chapter 1054 without moving a finger. But theory argues that both are far from the peak. The true Conqueror's Haki, as Joy Boy might have used in chapter 1043 with the drums of liberation echoing through the ages, or Imu in chapter 1085, manipulating shadows that devour islands, involves controlling the world's will, creating realities, or inspiring global revolutions. Luffy is at the basic level, using it to knock out or strike, while Shanks, although advanced, uses it for intimidation, not creation, suggesting that the divine level is reserved for legends like Joy Boy or a future Luffy. Conqueror's Haki has layers, as Oda suggests throughout the manga. Let's break them down to understand why Luffy is at the lowest level and Shanks is not at the top. Basic level, intimidation and knockout. This is the step where Luffy operates. In chapter 1, he already shows traces of Conqueror's Haki when facing the Sea King, but only consciously awakens it in chapter 634, knocking out fishmen on Fishman Island. It's a raw use, knocking out the weak with pure presence, like in chapter 946 in Udon, where he feints Kaido's guards. This level is instinctive, triggered by emotion like anger against Bellamy in chapter 223, or joy against Kaido in chapter 1044. Luffy uses it to clear the field, but doesn't refine it beyond that, as Rayleigh warns in chapter 597 that Haki needs training to grow. Intermediate level, Haki infusion. Luffy reaches this level in Wano in chapter 1010, learning from Hyogoro to infuse Conqueror's Haki into his punches, striking Kaido without touching him, like Roger does with Whitebeard in chapter 966. Zoro also reaches this level in chapter 1033, infusing Enma with Conqueror's Haki to cut King. This level allows devastating attacks, like the Bajrang gun in chapter 1049 that defeats Kaido but requires control and exhausts the user, as Luffy nearly dies in chapter 1045 after Gear 5. Shanks seems to master this, like in chapter 1079 against Kid, where he infuses his sword with Haki to destroy a ship from afar, but it's still a physical use, focused on destruction, not manipulation. Advanced level will manipulation. Here begins the true power, hinted at subtly. In chapter 519, Rayleigh says Conqueror's Haki can win hearts, not just crush. Shanks is close to this, like in chapter 580, where his presence at Marineford makes pirates and marines hesitate, or in chapter 1054, where Greenbull retreats without a fight. But this is intimidation, not control. The advanced level would be inspiring or manipulating wills on a massive scale, like Joy Boy might have done in chapter 1043, echoing his will for 800 years through the drums of liberation, or Imu in chapter 1085, whose shadowy presence seems to bend the Gorosei's minds. Luffy hasn't reached this. His Haki is chaotic, like in chapter 1045, where he laughs while fighting without directing wills beyond knockouts. Divine level reality shaping. The peak of Conqueror's Haki, never clearly seen but hinted at by legends. In Chapter 1115, Vegapunk says that devil fruits are manifested desires. Conqueror's Haki, as pure will, could manifest realities. Joy Boy, with Nika, in Chapter 1043, might have used Conqueror's Haki to create zones of freedom that change the world, like Luffy does on a smaller scale in Chapter 1045 with Gear 5. Emu, with Shadows in Chapter 1085, seems to use an inverted Haki that erases wills, destroying Lelouchia in Chapter 1060. This level would turn Haki into cosmic power, like Roger and Whitebeard splitting the sky in Chapter 966. But on a global scale, inspiring or crushing the world. Neither Shanks with his calm, nor Luffy with his chaos have reached this. Luffy's Conqueror's Haki is powerful but raw. He awakens late in Chapter 1010 against Kaido and uses it instinctively, like in Chapter 634 on Fishman Island, where he knocks out 50,000 with a glance, or in Chapter 946 in Udon, knocking out guards effortlessly. But his use is limited to emotional bursts. Anger, like against Hody in Chapter 634, or joy, like in Gear 5 in Chapter 1045. He only learns infusion in Chapter 1010, with Hyogoro teaching him mid-battle, showing a lack of formal training, like Rayleigh gave for other Hakis in Chapter 597. In Wano, in Chapter 1049, his infused Bajrang gun is epic, but exhausts him to the point of near death in Chapter 1045, indicating lack of control. Compared to Shanks, who in Chapter 1054 intimidates Green Bull from a distance, Luffy's Haki is sloppy. He knocks out the weak, like in Chapter 946, but doesn't affect strong ones like Kaido without infusion, and even then needs Gear 5 to win. In Chapter 1044, the Gorosei fear Nika more than Haki, suggesting Luffy relies on the fruit to shine, not pure Haki. In Elbaf, in Chapter 1158, with giants who use brute strength, he could evolve, perhaps learning from Hadruddin to infuse Haki in allies. But so far, his level is basic. Massive knockouts and infused punches, far from manipulating wills or realities like Joy Boy in Chapter 1043. Shanks is the king of Conqueror's Haki in fans' eyes with insane feats. In Chapter 580, he stops Marineford with his presence. In Chapter 1054, he makes Green Bull retreat without fighting. In Chapter 1079, he destroys Kid's ship with an infused strike, but theory suggests he is not at the divine level. His Haki is advanced but focused on intimidation and destruction, like in Chapter 1054, where he projects presence at a distance, or in Chapter 1079, where he infuses his sword. This is intermediate to advanced level, but not cosmic. Shanks shows no signs of shaping realities or controlling minds, like Joy Boy might have in Chapter 1043 with the drums of liberation echoing through the ages. In Chapter 966, Roger and Whitebeard use Conqueror's Haki in a stalemate that splits the sky, but they don't manipulate wills beyond inspiring their crews. Shanks, who inherits this style, uses it to maintain peace or crush enemies, like in Chapter 1054, but he doesn't create realities like Luffy does with Nika in Chapter 1045, suggesting that the peak involves a fusion of Haki with divine power. Emu in Chapter 1085 seems closer to this, with shadows that erase islands in Chapter 1060, perhaps an inverted Conqueror's Haki that crushes collective wills. Shanks, despite his calm and precision, remains at the level of intimidation, not creation, indicating that the top is reserved for legends like Joy Boy or a future Luffy. The true power of Conqueror's Haki at the divine level would be to manipulate the will of the world, as hinted by scattered clues. In Chapter 519, Rayleigh says that Haki conquers hearts, not just crushes. Joy Boy in Chapter 1043 echoes his will for 800 years through Zunisha, suggesting a Haki that transcends time, perhaps creating zones of freedom that inspire global revolts, as Vegapunk hints in Chapter 1115 about the Great Kingdom. Emu in Chapter 1085 uses a dark power that seems to bend the Gorosei's minds, perhaps a Conqueror's Haki that erases wills, destroying Lelouchia in Chapter 1060 with a command. This divine level would involve control of collective wills, inspiring or crushing entire populations like Luffy does on a small scale in Chapter 758 in Dressrosa, inspiring the Tontatas, but on a global scale like Joy Boy, inciting revolts in Chapter 1115. Reality shaping, combining Haki with devil fruits like Luffy does with Nika in Chapter 1045, but at a level that creates entirely new worlds worlds. Perhaps like the One Piece, an artifact that fulfills wishes in chapter 968. Temporal transcendence, echoing will across ages, like Joy Boy in chapter 1043, or erasing memories, like Imu does with the Void Century in chapter 395. Luffy is far from this. His haki is raw, like in chapter 1049, focused on punches. Shanks, with fine control in chapter 1054, intimidates but doesn't create. The peak would be Luffy in a final arc using Conqueror's haki with Nika to inspire the world against Imu, like in chapter 1115 with Vegapunk's broadcast making the Grand Line laugh in unison. Luffy's evolution is just beginning. In Elbaf in chapter 1158, with giants who use brute strength, he could learn from warriors like Dory and Brogy, who might use Conqueror's haki and Nordic rituals. A mentor like Shanks, who observes Luffy in chapter 1054, could teach control like Rayleigh in chapter 597, saying, "Kid, your haki is chaos. Learn to guide hearts." Luffy could train to infuse haki into allies, like in chapter 800 with the Grand Fleet, creating an invincible army that fights with his will. In the final confrontation against Imu, in chapter 1085, Luffy could reach the divine level using Conqueror's haki to inspire the world like Joy Boy in chapter 1043, but with his signature laughter turning Mariajoa into a circus of freedom with Gear 5 in chapter 1045. He would shout, "Imu, my haki makes everyone laugh. Your throne ends here." That would be epic, with Luffy shaping reality, making Imu's shadows dance like puppets. That was today's content. We hope you liked it and want to share your opinion on the subject. Don't forget to share the video, give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and stay amazing.